Please take their seats. I want to welcome you to the Monday, July 13 meeting of the City County Commons. We're meeting in the Lancaster County Events Center, as you can tell. We're grateful for those who have joined us today. I do see we have a few county board members and city council members not quite here yet, but because of the time constraint, we are going to get started. And then Angie, do you have to take a roll call vote?
Do you want one to open the meeting?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Okay, Jane Rayville. Rayville.
Yes.
Amundson. Yes. Mcginnis. Flowerday.
Yes.
Christianson.
Yes.
Shore.
Yes.
Ward.
Yes.
Vest. Washington.
Yes.
Yocum. Shobe.
Here.
Bowers.
Here.
And Mayor Gaylor Baird.
Okay, thank you everyone, and I just want to remind folks that we do have a copy of the Open Meetings Act. It's posted on one of the walls in the Lincoln Room here. The next order of business is to go ahead and make a motion to approve the minutes from our last City County Commons meeting.
I so move.
Is there moved by Amundson, seconded by Flowerday? Any discussion, any corrections or changes? Okay, seeing none, we can go ahead and vote.
Rayville.
Yes.
Amundson. Mcginnis. Flowerday.
Yes.
Christianson.
Yes.
Shore.
Yes.
Ward.
Yes.
Vest. Washington.
Yes.
Yocum. Shobe.
Yes.
Bowers.
Yes.
And Mayor Gaylor Baird.
Okay. Thank you everyone again. Welcome to the City County Commons meeting where we will be visiting with our essential law enforcement leaders. We know our job as elected officials is to deliver public safety, especially during this challenging time of the pandemic and the public's response to the death of George Floyd. This in turn has encouraged many dialogues about racism in our country and peaceful protests. Our job also means supporting law enforcement and other elected officials whose responsibility of ensuring public safety is the same. Let's all be clear, we know that defunding law enforcement, as so many have called out, will not achieve the outcomes that we all want to see. We support our law enforcement for the tremendous good that they do in our community and the tremendous risk they face as they do their jobs. The order of business, we will hear from Chief Bliemeister and Sheriff Wagner on the current policies and procedures and how we can best help them by working together in serving our community and restoring trust. We also have a brief presentation today of 5 minutes total by John Carlson, who is Deputy Chief of Staff for the City of Lincoln, and Dave Durbin, Lancaster County Chief Administrative Officer, to share with us the flow chart of the city and county departments and elected officials when it comes to law enforcement responsibility. So we'd like for John Carlson and Dave Durbin to come forward before us, and once they are finished, Roma will have a few words before we invite Chief Bliemeister and Sheriff Wagner to come up. All right, John, we'll have you go first and tell us a little bit about the flow chart for the City of Lincoln.
All right, thank you, Matt. Check, check. Thank you, Madam Chair, Commons members. I'm John Carlson. I'm the Deputy Chief of Staff for Mayor Gaylor Baird, and I've had the good fortune to work with most of you, so I appreciate the opportunity just to give, not necessarily you, but the public a little quick refresher and reminder on the organization chart for city government, of which many of you here are involved in. I've tried to put a copy on your tables, and there are some copies on chairs in back. It's relatively straightforward, and I won't go through the entire part. There's information on both sides. But essentially, referencing the organization chart on this side, at the top of our chart, of course, are the citizens of Lincoln. They're the boss. They're the people that elect us to come and do our job and try and serve the community with the best wisdom and judgment that we can. Then, like the federal government, we have at least two of the three branches. We have an executive branch and a legislative branch. City council members, as indicated on here, are in the legislative branch, and the mayor is the representative of the executive branch and the chief administrative officer for the city and the various directors. If you look underneath, we have a baker's dozen of departments, 13 of them, including the new aging department. And those directors answer directly to the chief executive, which is the mayor. Those directors are appointed by the mayor and approved by the city council. Technically, they can be removed by the mayor. Two in particular I want to point out, well, three actually, for different reasons, but the health department and the planning department are joint agencies, as you know, between the city and the county. And so those directors then answer both to the city council and to the county board, and they're installed through joint action of both of those bodies. The third one I'll point out is the Lincoln City Libraries, where we have the Lincoln City Library Board, and they are also involved in the appointment of that director. So essentially, activities, including policing activities through the police department, are managed by the directors, and they answer directly to the mayor through the chief of staff, Jennifer Brinkman, for day-to-day activities. But they're the heads of their divisions, and of course they discuss with the mayor different items of policy, and then overarching through the budget and through big policy decisions, obviously in conjunction with the city council. So that's the basic layout of city government, and I'd be happy to answer any questions if anyone has any.
All right, thank you. Then we will welcome Dave Durbin to talk a little bit about the county board side.
Dave Durbin, Chief Administrative Officer, Lancaster County. As you can see from the organizational chart that we have provided for the county, our organization is a lot different than the city's. The main thing you can tell is just by the layout and even the way that it's printed, instead of having a vertically integrated organization, we have a more horizontal organization to our. Is this better? I see less confused looks now, thank you. I'll start over. They were attached to the agenda. We'll hand out some hard copies.
Good. Oh, she did that really well. I didn't. Thank you. We're good.
Okay, as you can see from the handout that you have now been handed, the city's organization is quite different from the county's. The city has a vertically integrated organizational chart, whereas the Lancaster County voters have elected a number of different elected officials that lead to a horizontal organization for the Lancaster County government. The county board, the county commissioners who sit on the county board, are one body amongst many of largely independent elected officials. You can see that there's a county attorney, county clerk, county engineer, county sheriff, and amongst others, and they all have certain statutory duties that they perform largely independent of the board. Now, the board does have certain oversight responsibilities, and those largely come from the budgeting process. However, with respect to elected officials, the budgeting powers of the board are even limited there. By law, the board cannot entirely defund an organization such as the county engineer or the county sheriff. They're not allowed to budget an office out of existence, and they're also not allowed through the budget process to unduly hinder an elected official from performing his or her duties. Now, that's not to say that the county board and elected officials can't collaborate to make some meaningful changes in operations, and a good example this year would be the body camera initiative that the sheriff and the county board are partnering on. But without that cooperation, there's no room for unilateral changes in elected officials' operations by the county board. And I think that's important to clarify. Unlike, as John described, in an organizational chart for the city, where department heads theoretically can be removed at the will of the mayor, elected officials cannot be removed by the county board in most circumstances. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Dave? Well, I appreciate the summary from both of you. Thank you very much. And while you're taking your seats, I just wanted to say a few more words. On the next section, where we invite Chief Bliemeister and Sheriff Wagner to come up, we ask that the county board and the city council members write down and hold their questions until the very end, as we have 9 sections of questions to get through. The public may also write down their questions that we will collect, consolidate, and provide to LPD and LSO for them to answer. We will post their written responses with the meeting minutes. And before I open it up to Chief Bliemeister and Sheriff Wagner, I know that Roma Amundson, as the vice chair, has a few words of welcome as well.
Well, thank you all for coming. We really appreciate that. And we hope that this meeting does come to some sort of understanding of what goes on. You know, as elected officials of Lancaster County and the city of Lincoln, we all took an oath of office to support and defend the Constitution of the United States, and that we will bear true faith and allegiance to the principles stated therein, and that we will well and faithfully discharge the duties of our office. The very first amendment of the Constitution is that the people of the United States have the right to peaceably assemble and to petition the government to address their grievances. A duty that we as elected officials all share is to provide for the safety and the security of people living within our county and our city. The vision of the Board of Commissioners is to provide sustainable governmental services for a safe, healthy, and diverse community. For the fulfillment of that mission, we have provided for law enforcement, first responders, corrections, and the court and justice systems. There is no question that people have the right to assemble and to peaceably protest. However, when other people in the community suffer personal injury, or when destruction and defacement of private and public property occur as a result of that protest, law enforcement must step in to maintain safety and security for the whole community. When that happens, unfortunately, the message of the protest is often lost in the attention instead directed to the methods of law enforcement. And that is what has happened here. This is the reason why we are here, to discuss the training and the management of law enforcement in general. That does not, however, erase the fact that Sheriff Wagner and Chief Bliemeister are employed to provide law enforcement to support safety and security of the people living in our community. So again, thank you for all who have come to this meeting, and a special thanks to Sheriff Wagner and to Chief Bliemeister for their willingness to step up to the plate to discuss a difficult topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Roma, very much. That sets the tone for our great dialogue and discussion that we hope to have. And before we allow Chief Bliemeister to be pelted with all the questions that we have come up with, I wanted to give each one of you an opportunity to tell us a little bit, please share with us what you are most proud of when it comes to the work your officers and deputies do in our community that most folks don't know. So Chief Bliemeister, we'll have you go first.
Thank you, members of the council, members of the county board, for the opportunity to be here. As the chair mentioned, in a few minutes, Sheriff Wagner and I will be discussing questions that are filled with carefully considered answers answers that must be made with the awareness of numerous ongoing criminal investigations and multiple tort claims against the city and the county. The answers will be candid, but not compromise the integrity of those processes. Most importantly, it is my hope that our discussion today is focused on bridging a divide that exists in society and in our community. A divide that is present in the criminal justice system and in healthcare, education, housing, economics, and almost every facet of our society. For the last 24 years, I had the opportunity to watch community servants from the Lancaster County Sheriff's Office and the Lincoln Police Department. I am humbled and proud of their sacrifices and willingness to be part of a profession that truly impacts the quality of life in Lincoln and Lancaster County.
That people in the community don't know about the great deeds and work that your team does.
I'm probably going to be saying ditto a lot today. Since Chief Bliemeister gets to go first, I can just tell you that I'm most proud of the men and women that work for the Sheriff's Office. They do great work. I know that the public knows that and sees them every day, but you know, this started really kind of brought to light with the COVID-19 and exposing employees to potential infections on any given day. I don't know that most people know that we handle most of the coroner's investigations that occur in the city of Lincoln and Lancaster County. And so every potential death call at a home that we go to, you know, potentially puts our employees at risk. So I'm just really proud that they're willing to step into the line of fire every day, do what's right for all of our citizens, and that they're just a great group of men and women who live here, work here, and take care of the citizens of Lancaster County.
Thank you very much, Sheriff. And Chief Bliemeister, you have 9 sections of questions. So I'm going to read you the first section, all the questions in that, and then you'll have 5 minutes to respond so we can keep on a schedule. The first section is on hiring and recruiting. Where have you had successes in outreach? How do you recruit and hire for quality candidates? Do you use pre-interview online evaluations? What other assessment processes do you have in place? And what are your strategies for hiring for diversity? Go right ahead.
Former interns, 1 to 2 interns in the last several recruit classes. 9 of 12 recruits were former LPD interns in the fall of 2019. Where have we had success? UNL, UNO, SCC, Union College, Doane, Wayne State. Internships in education and personnel, investigations, the street teams, victim assistance, communications and management services. Where else? Lateral hires. Several lateral hires in the last few classes following changes to the collective bargaining agreement that makes that more successful. The military. 1 to 2 recruits in the last few classes have military experience. How do we recruit and hire for quality candidates? We recruit from pools of applicants at colleges and universities, the military, local churches, community centers, individual leaders. Every one of you has a responsibility to recruit and bring forward the highest quality community servants to our agencies. That individual attention cannot be dismissed, and it's so important to our success. The vetting processes include written and physical tests, a personal history statement that a copy has been provided to all of you, a 2-hour structured interview, background investigations including housing, finances, criminal history, a polygraph, and a psychological exam. Recruitment has been increasingly difficult in the recent years. Smaller number of applicants. We're currently in the application and testing phase for our class that will begin in January of 2021. As the graph in front of you shows, we had 168 applicants for the current spring class of 2021. If that applicant pool remains consistent, that will be the lowest number of applicants that we've ever had into our profession. What are we doing? Currently, we're utilizing an expanded partnership based with Swanson and Russell to review and revamp our recruiting and hiring processes. We have partnered with researchers to improve our processes and limit the number of no-show applicants and look for ways where hurdles are existing in the current structure and how we can modify that structure within applicable case law and rules and regulations. Do we use pre-interview online evaluations? We absolutely do. That personal history statement that you have in front of you is very complex and in-depth, and we review those applications for pre-existing disqualifiers based upon Nebraska state rules and regulations. What other assessment processes do we have in place? As I mentioned, investigative criminal history, credit history, residential history, employment history, education, military, cyber vetting. Social media is a big place where we're looking to understand the people that are coming to us. A polygraph, a psychological exam, and the drug screening. And I have to emphasize that this is a continuum. It's not one part of this process that's most important. It is the collective of the process that is. What are your strategies for hiring diversity? Where we recruit. Local churches and religious organizations, community centers, cultural centers, the military bases, colleges and universities, national publications, including the National Minority Update, specific classes that are established to help people succeed, including communities of color, as for the entire 150-year existence of the Lincoln Police Department. The demographics of our agency have not met the community that we serve. I mentioned the Doane University research reports. We are heavily focused on evidence-based research to guide our decisions, not emotion, but evidence and data. And 2 of those reports have analyzed why applicants don't show up for the testing and identified challenges and solutions. We also conducted a disparity analysis and evaluated whether bias exists in LPD's hiring processes, and the only evidence of disproportionality was in the written test between Caucasians and blacks, and in the physical testing for female candidates. This is important. In April of 2016, I began at the Lincoln Police Department. We had 313 full-time employees, commissioned employees, on our staff. 84.6% were male, 15.3% female, 2.5% Latino, 1.91% black, 0.64% Native American, 1.28% Asian, and 0.32% that declared 2 or more races. Fast forward to today. We have 363 employees at the Lincoln Police Department, commissioned employees. We have made strides in diversity of our females, of Latinos, of our black officers. Native American has been reduced, and our Asian officers have increased. I also want to point out positions of rank, positions of influence. Today, 12 of our 58 female employees are sergeants or captains. That's 20.7%. Of the Latino officers that work for the Lincoln Police Department, 25% are in a leadership role. Of the black officers, 43% are in a leadership role. The Asian officers, 16.7%. Caucasian male officers are 15.7%. And I think that that is a worthwhile statistic. And that answers those particular questions.
The next section is on new recruit training. Describe the training curriculum. What percentage of time is spent on developing effective community outreach, de-escalation, implicit bias, use of force, mental health crisis resolutions, and cultural sensitivity.
Our Academy training curriculum, which is posted on our public webpage, available for all of you to review. It is also important to recognize that that curriculum is based upon a job task analysis that was updated for the state of Nebraska in 2019, and it guides that curriculum. It makes what is minimum expectations. Our academy is 22 weeks long, approximately 800 hours. Recruits are trained on a variety of topics using instructors from within our organization and outside. Percentages are difficult to calculate as curriculums change from year to year, but 43 separate courses address implicit bias. 22 separate courses address use of control. 67 separate courses address ethics. Specifically, we have a curriculum, a 4-hour curriculum on ethics, a 3-hour curriculum on unbiased policing, and a 4-hour curriculum on fair and impartial policing. But it is so important to recognize that those are core components of all of these other classes that exist. What percentage of time is spent on developing effective community outreach, implicit bias, cultural sensitivity? Once again, percentages are difficult to calculate as our annual training topics vary from year to year. However, these topics are always covered by various presenters. The following topics are always covered during annual in-service training as mandated by our policy and also by CALEA. So we are an accredited police agency since 1989. And once again, the rigors of that accreditation should not be dismissed. The next question is on, so Jane, is it on the community engagement?
Annual training, some of those points you did answer, but on the annual training, as the recruits have graduated and now they're full-fledged officers, what percentage of time is continuously spent on developing effective community outreach, implicit bias, and cultural sensitivity? What percentage of time is spent on the use of force, mental health crisis resolutions, and de-escalation? And tell us about programs that you feel have been successful in achieving greater community awareness and unity. How are you messaging these successful outreach efforts to the community? How can we, as policymakers, what can we do to help ensure that the city and county departments have the tools and resources they need to build trust?
Okay, so the percentage of time, these are the topics that are covered annually: firearms recertification, taser recertification, less than lethal recertification, defensive tactics, ethics, bias, fair and impartial policing. So all of those are covered, and they are mandated by our policies. And once again, our training requirements for annual in-service training go above and beyond the statutorily mandated 20 hours for officers within the state of Nebraska. Community outreach, so I need to provide some perspective to this. In calendar year 2019, not over the last 12 months because of COVID, we completed 554 total presentations, approximately 700 hours that reached 36,000 people within Lincoln. In that same year, our street officers spent more than 568 hours on community engagement events. 423 different instances of an officer appearing at a community function, not including officers who attended but didn't call out because of they didn't want to be perceived as not being responsive to the constant 125,000 calls for service that we're responding to on an annual basis. Programs that we believe are successful, I'm going to talk about a list of the programs, but these are the formalized ones. Shop with a Cop, community conversations proctored by John Harris, 5 of them in 2017. The new initiatives with Trace, Catch a Cop, Operation Tipping Point, Operation Taking Pause, Coffee with a Cop, Pop with a Cop, Cookie with a Cop, Cops and Bobbers at Holmes Lake, proactive visits to cultural centers within the academy, National Night Out, attendance by all of our team members at all the different neighborhood associations, Trunk or Treat, LPS Job Shadow Day, the Citizens Academy, Leadership Lincoln Ride-Along, Santa Claus, Youth Explorers Program, Special Olympics, Police Youth Football. This is not all inclusive. How's the messaging? Platforms such as Facebook, Twitter, our partnerships with traditional media outlets. But this is one area that we need to do better. We've never been focused on, well, look at us. This is what we're doing. In fact, at times when you talk with our officers, that seems disingenuous. But it's apparent to me, based upon conversations that we've had, that we need to do a better job of marketing the outstanding work of the men and women of the Lincoln Police Department. What can you as policymakers do to help ensure the city and county departments have the tools and resources they need to build trust? Since 2016, additional personnel has remained my focus in growing our organization. We need your assistance to recruit for us, prompt good people with service mindsets to come forward and apply. What you can do is pass or rescind laws that identify community priorities or that don't. If we're passing laws that are unenforceable, I would ask you to reconsider that. And if we're passing laws or have laws on the books that are outside of our community's expectations, then that is something that you can assist us with too. And finally, I'll leave it at this on these questions. Please help us to make informed community decisions based upon best practice, evidence and research, and data, and attempt to allow us to make those decisions void of emotion.
Thank you, Chief. The next section is internal and external reviews and discipline. There are 5 questions. Please tell us, what are the current policies and practices in place? How is discipline determined? What is the process? When does the union get involved? What changes would you like to see to create more transparency? What are the circumstances that determine an officer or deputy undergo additional training? And is there a current database for officers and deputies who have numerous incident reports that require additional training?
A disciplinary action for the Lincoln Police Department can be triggered either internally or externally, and those particular fashions happen all the time. The most serious of complaints land within the internal affairs realm. These include excessive force, false arrests, harassment, discrimination, or serious criminal misconduct. Complaints that don't fall within those particular categories are investigated by a direct supervisor, and the discipline is handled within that officer's chain of command. So the discipline itself, which is often both punitive and educational, is handled by the sergeant and the captain, and then reviewed by the assistant chief. Once again, the more serious come through the internal affairs, and Sergeant Tarvis Banks works directly underneath the office of the chief. Any sustained discipline is maintained in an employee's file in accordance with the labor contract guidelines. How is this discipline determined? What is the process? When does the union get involved? Discipline is determined by the level and the seriousness of the alleged complaint and conduct. It's determined by the employee's chain of command, and it is made in concert with past practice for similar types of violations. The most serious or egregious internal complaints are ultimately made by me, and those particular ones are focused on intent, They are focused on what kind of discipline has been mitigated in the past and how egregious was it. And so there is a broad spectrum of these particular complaints. Progressive discipline is an element for repeat offenses that are similar in nature, whether that is the similar rule or policy that's being violated, or whether it is based upon knowing through the investigative process that these things have occurred before. The process is the same at both levels. A complaint is received either internally or externally, and we see examples of that all the time. An investigation ensues, and discipline and education is issued if there is a sustained violation of policy or practice. Union representation only becomes involved when presenting someone during the internal affairs interview. So they have the right to have union representation, including an attorney, during the internal affairs process. The union has no other involvement in discipline. And at the Lincoln Police Department, arbitration or binding arbitration, which is often the discussed point across the country, is not part of the collective bargaining agreements. What changes? To create more transparency, as an agency, we provide a great deal of transparency. Summaries of our IA investigations are read during public quarterly meetings at the CPIB, at the Citizens Police Advisory Board. All of those statistics for any kind of complaint are posted quarterly and then with an annual review for the past 3 years in comparison on our webpage. A main concern for us in making all disciplinary allegations public is this can create a false perception that an officer with multiple exonerated complaints still is guilty. So this is a kind of thing that we struggle with all the time. Is the presence of an unsustained or unsubstantiated complaint indicative of malfeasance? I trust the processes that exist. What circumstances determine an officer's whether they undergo additional training? Anyone in the employee's chain of command can mandate remedial training as part of the issued discipline. And as I mentioned, during my tenure as chief of police in the internal affairs investigations, which is the most serious, it is often a mandate that goes hand in hand. Employees also, we talk about these repetitive. How do we know if an officer is violating policy over and over again? So we have the early warning tracking system, which is very codified and once again publicly available, that says, hey, this officer has had 3 incidents of a minor rule violation within the last 6 months. And we're able to watch that, have another review completed to determine if there is a pattern of practice. And I think that that is really important. Another, how do we ensure the mental health successes of our staff? And we oftentimes are making mandatory referrals to the Employee Assistance Program as part of our disciplinary processes. This is a difference here between an agency with 500 people and a smaller agency. As an agency grows, it is more important to have very structured and formalized, codified policies and practices in order to ensure that something isn't falling through the gaps and to ensure that the ultimate mission and value of our agency is being met. Is there a database for officers who have numerous incident reports? The early warning tracking system and the personnel files are absolutely that database. LB 791, passed in 2018, mandates that each agency shall maintain a record regarding the reasons or reasons for and the circumstances surrounding a separation from the law enforcement officer, by the law enforcement officer from the employing agency. This is a public record, and it is one that is focused on the most egregious And I think that this is an excellent change in Nebraska state statute that puts this out for the public to review and to know that an agency is taking this seriously. I think that's it.
Thank you, Chief. The next category is role of Civilian Advisory Board. What role does the Civilian Advisory Board play? Should there be a civilian complaint board? What suggestions do you have on making their work more transparent, and how can they assist your department?
Okay. The Citizens Police Advisory Board was established in 1975. The members independently meet with citizens and complainants and the officers, and they complete their own independent investigation. While that is occurring, an internal affairs investigation is also occurring. So you have these two different investigative processes that are running parallel for the Lincoln Police Department. The primary duties of the Citizens Police Advisory Board, a mayoral appointed citizens board, is to make recommendations on discipline and policy. Any complaint, once again, that is taken by the CPAB is also investigated by us internally, separate and distinct. More transparent. Public meetings, I don't know how to be more transparent than the quarterly meetings the CPAB meets and they discuss what has been included. This has also been members of the media. I see Riley Johnson behind me. Riley Johnson has been present at these particular meetings. And I would point you to our general order, once again publicly available on the CPAB and the processes there, and then all of the Lincoln Municipal Codes in Chapter 4.08 that outlines the purposes, the powers, and the duties of the CPAB. How can they assist our department? They are crucial to assisting our department. I utilize members of the CPAB in our hiring practices. The most recent example is this. Shirley Mora James, who is a member of the Citizens Police Advisory Board, was invited in by me to help conduct interviews for our internal affairs sergeants, and she did that. And that's the second time that she's done that for me during my tenure. They also participate in selection processes, promotional processes, and in special committees that many of you sitting here today have participated in. We are inviting in members of the CPAB and members of the public continuously to afford their insight, their thoughts on our decision-making processes for policies and promotions. Next.
Okay. Terrific. Union partnerships. I know you touched on this briefly. What role does the union play in training and discipline and making sure that officers and deputies get additional training if needed? How can they assist with greater transparency? What is the role of the union on justice and policy reforms?
The Lincoln Police Union is a separate and distinct entity. And these particular questions have been forwarded to members of the Lincoln Police Union. But I want to talk about a couple of the different specifics in this. Lincoln Police Union is able to provide feedback, as do citizens of Lincoln and members of certain boards, on our policies, our procedures, our training, because they have a vested interest in ensuring members are well trained and educated about the most effective, up-to-date curriculums, evidence-based practices, and data-driven approaches. For example, the union may request additional training for a topic or a policy. As far as the transparency, we have an outstanding partnership with the Lincoln Police Union. But I need to make sure to provide clarification that the union, while they have a voice, ultimately decisions on discipline, on policies and practices, come through the chief of police. And management rights exist and are codified within the collective bargaining contracts and in our policies and procedures.
The next section is on jurisdiction. How is jurisdiction determined? What are the mutual aid situations you work together on? Natural disasters, football games, what else? And how do you decide who handles interference?
Jurisdiction is determined based upon predetermined factors that are codified, often as part of mutual aid agreements, which we have an extensive mutual aid agreement with the Lancaster County Sheriff's Office, with the University of Nebraska, and with the Nebraska State Patrol. For one example, the Hall of Justice and physical security of the building falls on the Sheriff's Office. However, LPD provides support to the Sheriff's Office to complete and be part of the security mission. In events such as Husker football home games, the University of Nebraska-Lincoln maintains overall control of events inside and immediately outside of the stadium, while LPD maintains control over traffic direction and the exterior of the city property. Decisions are made at a unified command which involves multiple law enforcement agencies as well as multiple other government agencies. What are mutual aid situations that we work on together? Natural disasters, football games, basketball games, volleyball games. Natural disasters were a component of the overall response. A recent example would be the flooding from a year ago through the Emergency Operations Center. The Husker football games were a component of the external and internal response to game day operations. Parades and protests that involve the Capitol, UNL grounds, the Hall of Justice, all of those are other examples where there is mutual aid that comes into play. Extended incidents requiring the deployment of specially trained officers in order to come to a peaceful resolution. And today would be another example, mutual aid. There was a homicide that occurred in our community at 13th and Washington this morning, where a 48-year-old man lost his life at the hands of his son. We depended on the Lancaster County Sheriff's Office, as we do in many circumstances, for their assistance in the processing of that particular crime scene. Okay.
Okay, and then the next category is a little bit similar, but it's called incident command teams. When you have two or more agencies involved, how is leadership determined? And it talks a little bit about the mutual aid situations that we mentioned, natural disasters, football games, and then when there are two or more agencies involved, how do you decide who handles interference?
So you're going to have to clarify what interference means.
I think it basically means who is the lead agency, who is operational command, who does everyone report to and take orders from.
Very good. Once again, leadership, otherwise known as incident command and unified command, is based on a variety of factors that include jurisdiction and the codifications within the mutual aid agreements. As I previously mentioned, examples, the Hall of Justice and that particular campus, on the campus itself, is the primary responsibility of the Lancaster County Sheriff's Office. Once you step out onto 10th Street or K Street or H or 9th, that becomes the primary responsibility of the Lincoln Police Department. So as you can see and envision in very dynamic incidents, it is very fluid. How do we make that determination? The determination is mainly based upon what is happening now, where is it happening? The University of Nebraska is another great example of this, in that on campus, within Memorial Stadium, that is the primary responsibility, and we participate in unified command with UNL on every game day. But the events outside of the campus, within the city limits of Lincoln, are the primary responsibility. And while we have overlapping and very similar policies, training, and practices, there are slight differences, and in very dynamic situations, it is important that while there is a unified command, the different agencies operate within the policies and procedures and training and the expectations of the independent agencies themselves. So that's kind of who is the lead agency. And if we're referring to the specific events that occurred May 29th through June 1st, that really goes back into it was an evolving situation that no one law enforcement agency had the ability to meet. And that's why there was partnerships with the Lancaster County Sheriff's Office, the Nebraska State Patrol, the National Guard, and the Nebraska State Patrol. Okay.
And I'll let you wrap up there on open conversation. What tools do you need? Do you need more body cameras, more training? What are some of the obstacles and impediments you see that your department is facing? And what measures should be taken if we are at 5 steps into the 8 suggested reforms that we hear talked about quite a bit? How can we help? And then what can the public do to help?
Very good. What do we need? We are the smallest policing agency in the state of Nebraska and one of the smallest policing agencies for our size in the country. We need people. We need high-quality community servants. In addition to that, civilian employees, body cameras. Yep, we've been implementing body cameras 2018, the first team 2019, the second team along with our traffic unit. And we wanted to continue that incremental increase because it's not just about capturing the particular event that becomes the focus. It is much more important about the quality assurance measures that are built into the use of those cameras where our supervisors are proactively reviewing prior to these bad things happening. So prevention. So we need that, and that I'm happy to say that that is part of additional teams of body-worn cameras is part of the mayor's proposed budget. All of those different things also take time to support. And part of the proposed budget is also to add 2 civilian employees that will be able to administer this very, very large-scale technology program and then coordinate those efforts with the Lancaster County Attorney's Office, with the City of Lincoln's Prosecutor's Office. And while we could sit here and debate all day whether the focus of that technology is on objectively providing evidence in criminal cases, that's part of what we do. We respond to and investigate incidents of crime that occur in our community. 14.24% as of today over the 5-year average of violent crime in our community. High-profile incidents occurring this morning, this weekend with a gun battle at 14th and O Street. That's part of what we do. And it is sometimes hard to look at and to think about. Technology, the servers to support the addition of body-worn cameras, physical assistance. The first 2 weeks of June, the taxpayers of Lincoln and Lancaster County paid $170,000 in overtime in an effort to prevent and respond to the events that occurred in our community. That includes the individuals that have taken to the streets without parade permits, without anything else, that we are going to continue to provide traffic direction and control to, because we're trying to prevent tragedy from occurring here. What else do we need? And as I mentioned earlier, your assistance in recruiting, your analysis of laws, of whether they are important to the community expectations, whether you want your police departments and your sheriff's office to enforce them. We have to be cautious of unfunded mandates that increasingly chip away at the time. You mentioned the 5 steps into the 8 as another point to go through. There's a lot behind this. 5 steps, 8 can't wait. I'd encourage you to take the time to research, where do these things come from? Where does this social media campaign come from? What is the evidence and the data that supports it? And who initiates it? But where are we today? When this all started, it mentioned that the Lincoln Police Department was explicitly compliant with 3 of the 8. I can tell you that explicitly we are compliant with 4 of the 8, and in practice, almost all of them. Bans, chokeholds, and strangleholds, we don't train or condone respiratory neck restraints. We've made suggested changes to our policy that goes a step further, that bans vascular restraints. Vascular restraints that have been used to mitigate additional harm within our community 14 times over the last 5 years. 14 times in probably 7 to 8 million contacts by Lincoln police officers. And I worry when we take that tool away from our staff of what happens next. What do they revert to? And does it have an unintended consequence of causing greater harm? Requiring de-escalation, frustrating. De-escalation is the cornerstone of our training and our policy. De-escalation is taught from the beginning in our academy throughout FTO. It is part of our defensive tactics annual in-service training, and it will continue to be, because we know when there is from the research that has been done with outside partners, that when there is a struggle, the propensity for injury obviously increases to both the individual and to the officer. So anything that we can do to de-escalate a situation is paramount. The priority, the preservation of life, is first and foremost. A general order to require warning before shooting. Our current General Order 1510 states that when feasible, living in this world of absolutes, shalls, always, wills, does not take into account the unpredictability of the very few dynamic situations that occur in your community. Exhaust all other means by shooting. The Lincoln Police Department trains its officers that discharging their firearm constitutes lethal force and should only be done in a last resort. In no case shall an officer discharge a firearm until all other reasonable means have been exhausted or would clearly be ineffective. That exists today and goes right back to the more important guiding priority, the culture of the preservation of life. Duty to intervene and stop excessive force by other officers, that's in there. Today, when in a position to do so, officers shall intervene, and when they know or have an articulate reason to know that another officer is about to use or is using unreasonable or excessive force, officers shall promptly report that to a supervisor. Ban shooting at motor vehicles. Today, the Lincoln Police Department bans the shooting at or into a motor vehicle except for the most dire of situations. Require a use of force continuum. That exists in our policies and procedures today. Require comprehensive reporting each time an officer uses forces or threatens to do so. We have quality assurance measures that begin with the officer and their immediate supervisor, that go to their commanding officer, through the assistant chief, and through the captain in administrative services, management services. All of those, in and of themselves, wouldn't be effective, but collaboratively, I believe that they are. So, the 8 can't wait. There's 2 major changes that have been proposed that have had public input on them. One, banning chokeholds and strangleholds. Remember I said that they were banned and always have been banned? Well, we've taken that additional step in banning lateral vascular neck restraints and the shoulder pin. We'll see where that goes. Last is to codify that anytime a firearm is pointed at an individual, that invokes the same processes of review that does the deployment of a taser or the deployment of a firearm, something like that. It's a good thing. It's a good change that came out of this, and I'm in support of that. What can the public do to help? The evaluation of policies and practices of this level of complexity can take weeks and months. I know that there is a focus on doing it now, today, within the next week, but I am asking that these decisions be made based upon research, evidence, and data. I would ask that there be a recognition that outstanding efforts on the part of Lincoln police officers exist today and have since the 70s for community-oriented policing. It is so ingrained in the culture, problem-solving in partnership well beyond the parameters of our agency. And I ask all of you to continue to be part of a process that advocates for the citizens, that holds me and our agency accountable, but also provides support to a tremendously difficult job that is needed in our society today. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Chief, for your comments and your candor. And I'm going to turn it over to Roma, and she will ask the very same questions of Sheriff Wagner. I'll be the timekeeper, too.
Okay. Thank you, Chief Bliemeister. That was very good. Okay, Terry, or Sheriff Wagner, excuse me.
Terry's fine.
In hiring and recruiting. Again, the 5 questions: where have you had success in outreach? How do you recruit and hire for quality candidates? How do you use pre-interview online evaluations? What other assessment processes do you have in place? And what are your strategies for hiring for diversity?
Okay. Well, the areas we've typically had success, we use social media advertising, Twitter, Facebook, word of mouth from current employees to recruit those employees or those people they know that are of the character to be law enforcement officers. Career fairs, online email notifications, numerous job sites, college sites. We post vacancies. Our intern program has produced a number of our employees being guest speakers at local colleges at their criminal justice classes. We've also had a great amount of success in our ride-along program that allows members of the public to shadow a deputy during their shift. It's great for educating the general public about our roles and responsibilities and our challenges and what we encounter at work and the pride that we take in making citizens feel safe. From a recruiting standpoint, we are aggressive at career fairs. We bring our state-of-the-art equipment, photos, brochures, and advertising trinkets to try to recruit members at those career fairs. We emphasize the benefits of working at the Lancaster County Sheriff's Office. And again, we use social media. We send out emails to those who've expressed interest at our career fair, and then try to answer all those questions that they might have. From a hiring standpoint, our hiring process is a bit different than the police departments. Our hiring practices are governed by the Merit Commission. It's a statutory function that's set forth for sheriff's offices over a certain population threshold. So for instance, our Merit Commission is comprised of a a member, an elected official appointed by the County Board of Commissioners, a member at large appointed by the presiding judge of the district court, and a member that's a deputy sheriff appointed by the other deputy sheriffs. So the Merit Commission, within the guidelines of the statutes that govern it, established the rules and regulations for hiring, for discipline, for promotions, those kinds of things. So it would be equal to the Civil Service Commission on the city side, if you know what that is. So we have to follow the rules and regulations of the Merit Commission. We conduct a written examination that all applicants must pass before continuing on to the physical agility examination. Once they have passed the written and the physical agility test, then they are scheduled for a pre-screen interview. We don't do an online pre-screen, but we do those in person that basically goes over the person's personal history statement and identifies those issues that might disqualify them from employment in law enforcement. Once they have completed those, they go before a 4-member panel, 4 members of our office, on an oral interview. And again, they ask those questions about their work history, their military history, drug and alcohol use, social activities, undetected crimes which they may have committed, and situational reasoning questions. We also ask questions specifically related to our mission, value, and visions about our office. So after the applicants have passed the written, the physical, the pre-screen, and the oral board, they're ranked according to a scoring instrument, and that list of ranked members goes to the Merit Commission. They certify those, and I can only hire from the top 3 candidates. So regardless of whether who falls on number 10, if we only have one applicant or one opening, I can only hire from the top 3 candidates. So that hinders us sometimes in minority recruitment and hiring, because we have to hire from the top 3 candidates. After an initial offer of employment is made to the applicant, then they must pass a polygraph examination, psychological evaluation, a medical screening, and another test to be able to get into Grand Island. So that's where we're at. I guess I'll just leave it at that because I know we're running out of time.
Okay, the new recruit training. Describe the training curriculum. What percentage of time is spent on developing effective community outreach, de-escalation, implicit bias, use of force, mental health, crisis resolutions, and cultural sensitivity?
I'm glad I wasn't the only one, Roma. Basically, our new deputy sheriffs attend the Nebraska Law Enforcement Training Center in Grand Island. We don't have an in-house academy, so we send our deputies to a 16-week program. It's a live-in academy at Grand Island. It houses both the Nebraska Law Enforcement Training Center and the State Patrol's Training Center. Well, very quickly, it's about 626 hours of training that the new deputies receive in Grand Island. It's very difficult to quantify some of the specific training issues, but the blanket use of force training is 5 hours in duration, but they have skills every day that require use of force materials, so they're looking at about 17 hours. The mental health training is an 8-hour course. De-escalation is talked about in defensive tactics, traffic stops, firearms training, tactical communications, and patrol procedures. Implicit bias is touched on in patrol, tactical communications, community relations, and traffic stops. Crisis resolution and cultural sensitivity. Again, those are incorporated in to other training, core training programs as well as ethics. So we received much of this information from the Nebraska Law Enforcement Training Center because they develop, with the concurrence of the Police Standards Advisory Council, the training curriculum for new law enforcement officers in Nebraska. The State Patrol, Lincoln Police, Omaha Police, and now the metro area in Omaha are the only 3 academies outside of Grand Island. So the majority of state law enforcement officers are trained in Grand Island.
Okay. Mm-hmm. You bet. Okay. Annual training. What percentage of time is spent on developing effective community outreach, implicit bias, and cultural sensitivity? What percentage of time is spent on use of force, mental health crisis resolutions, and de-escalations? And tell us about the programs that you feel have been successful in achieving greater community awareness and unity. How are you messaging these successful outreach efforts? And what can we, as policymakers, do to help ensure that the city and the county departments have the tools and resources that they need to build trust?
Well, I'm going to back up just a minute. I forgot a key component of our new recruit training. Once new deputies get back from the 16-week training program in Grand Island, we have a 2 to 3 week mini academy that touches on our radio system, our reporting system, some of those aspects that are unique to the Lancaster County Sheriff's Office. And then for 13 weeks, new deputies are in the field training program, and so once they complete the field training program, then they're out on their own for another 6 weeks. So it's about a year-long process from beginning to advertise for applications to when we get a new deputy sheriff out on patrol all by themselves. So it's a very lengthy process, and we typically have 2 to 3 new employees per year, so our attrition's pretty low. In our annual training, our state law requires 20 hours of training per year for law enforcement officers to maintain their certification. We require 40 hours by policy for our employees, and that covers a variety of topics, but state law requires that firearms, domestic violence, pursuit driving be covered annually, so that's going to eat up some of the time that I just mentioned. Again, they're really difficult because in every aspect of training, we make it a point to incorporate explicit bias, cultural sensitivity, those kinds of things in every aspect of training, not just teaching those topics in and of themselves. So, we have an in-house instructors that are certified in implicit bias and conduct that training for us annually. Our hours of training on an annual basis, it's like I said, pretty difficult to quantify, but hours that were related to community outreach, implicit bias, and cultural sensitivity for a 5-year period, 587 training hours. Now, I don't know how many deputies attended that, so that would be a total of 587 hours. Hours related to use of force, mental health, crisis resolution, and de-escalation, about 1,900. So, again, it depends upon how many deputies would attend each one of those trainings that would give us the total number of hours. Our scheduling is such that all of our employees work on 1 day a week. So half our department trains 1 week and half trains another week. So we've incorporated that 2 days a month into their training calendar so that we have the time to provide that training for employees. While our main, the programs that have been successful, while our main patrol function is in the rural parts of Lancaster County, we do interact with the citizens of Lincoln quite a bit. And we interact with Cedars, for example, with their 5-0 Fun Club. It's a really neat interaction between deputy sheriffs and kids who are living at Cedars that are at risk. So that's a really great thing that brings at-risk youth together and deputies for a number of reasons. We also participate in the Trick or Trunk program, the Citizens Academy that Chief Bliemeister mentioned. We participate in that as well to provide that experience for citizens. We go to a number of community events every year. We'll take our emergency rescue vehicle. It seems to be a real popular item with kids at some of those events. So we'll take the ERV out to them. We participate in various boards throughout the community. We have one of our command staff members is on the board for the bridge, is the past president of the bridge, board of directors. The current president, I'm the current president for the Child Advocacy Center and have been on that board for a number of years. The Nebraska Safety Council, the County City Credit Union. We have a board of directors member on the Mothers Against Drunk Driving. But I think something that needs to be remembered, for every hour that our employees are at community functions, that's 1 hour that they're not providing their primary job function. And be that patrol or investigations or court security, we have to balance that participation in community events with their normal job function. And one thing I might just bring up here, clearly half of our duties are statutorily mandated. So if you look at our organizational chart, our patrol deputies and our investigators are much the same as Lincoln police officers and their investigators, or state troopers and their investigators. Where we differ are those duties that are mandated by statute for us to perform. For example, court security is a huge issue. It takes up a lot of our personnel. We have 19 courts in our building that we are responsible for. And so we take that very seriously, and we're required by law to do it. We get visits from about 3,500 sex offenders every year in our office. They're required to come to our office, and we update the sex offender registry. We're issuing handgun or firearms purchase permits, and we're doing that at a record pace these days. We transport prisoners statewide according to state statute. And our civil process unit, sheriff's deputies continue to serve subpoenas, divorce decrees, all those legal documents come from the courts. So those are statutorily mandated duties. So about half our agency is involved in those necessary statutorily mandated functions, and half are involved in your normal law enforcement functions.
Thank you, Terry. Let's go on to another one, in the internal and the external reviews and discipline. Please tell us, what are the current policies and practices? How is discipline determined? What is the process? And when does the union get involved? What changes would you like to see more transparency? What are the circumstances that develop an officer or deputy? What are the circumstances that determine an officer or deputy undergo additional training? And is there a current database for officers and deputies who have numerous incident reports that require additional training?
Yes. I mean, I'll have to preface some of this by, if our policies look sort of the same, I think they were all developed by Tom Cassidy back in the day when he was with the police department and when he was sheriff. So a lot of our policies were developed by Chief Cassidy or Sheriff Cassidy, depending upon his particular hat, and they have been modified according to the best practices nationwide in court cases and those kinds of things. But a lot of our policies pretty much mirror each other. So we take complaints, just like Chief Bliemeister said, from citizens that call in, or if a supervisor internally, a violation of policy is identified, then a supervisor will take action. In some cases, when citizens call in, it's a matter of explaining our policies to them on a given topic, whatever that might be, and many times that satisfies what they were not happy about in the first place. If they make a complaint and we take that complaint, then we have a process where it's either a formal investigation or an informal investigation, depending upon the severity of the complaint and the potential severity of the disciplinary action that might result should that complaint be founded. So we receive those complaints. We have a sergeant that's assigned as our internal affairs investigator, and they will interview witnesses and review evidence, do whatever's necessary, just like any other investigation, in determining what exactly happened. So our investigative complaints are disposed of in the following manner. They are either unfounded, meaning the investigation concluded that the act giving rise to the complaint did not occur. Or if they're exonerated, the investigation showed that the act giving rise to the complaint occurred and the actions of the employee were justified, lawful, and proper. If a complaint is sustained, that conclusively proves that the allegation made against the deputy is true, and not sustained, obviously, is that the complaint was neither founded or could not either conclusively prove or disprove the allegations made in the complaint. So from there, the investigations come to the chief deputy or me. We review those complaints depending upon the severity of the offense or the allegations. We will either hold a disciplinary hearing or simply issue a disciplinary in the form of a personnel action. The discipline is much the same as you heard before. Obviously, the level of discipline has both aggravating and mitigating circumstances. The severity of the violation, the employee's past general performance, the disciplinary action will be consistent with that taken in similar circumstances for the same violation. And then the character of the violation as intentional or inadvertent, the actual or reasonable foreseeable consequences of that violation, and the prevailing conditions and circumstances at the time of the violation. So those are some of the components that go into deciding the disciplinary action. You know, right now, once I have decided on the level of disciplinary action, employees can appeal that to the Merit Commission that we talked about before. It's the first line of appeal. It is a public hearing, so all of those hearings are a public hearing just as this is. And so for transparency, when an employee appeals their disciplinary action, it goes to the Merit Commission. Additional training can go at any time, whether it's an annual evaluation identified problem. So if a deputy's having an annual evaluation and there's the supervisor has identified some deficit, then there can be a training plan completed for that particular employee. Additional training can be a component of disciplinary action, or it cannot. And then we keep a log of those so that we are consistent in our disciplinary action as required by the Merit Commission, so that the same discipline for this action, if it's the same action, gets the same discipline here. So that's sort of how that works, if that's clear. And then the database that Chief Bliemeister talked about, the state law requires that deputies who are terminated or who resign under threat of termination, we complete a form to send to the Nebraska Law Enforcement Training Center, and they keep that information available. It also requires that if we hire an existing law enforcement officer, that the administrator of that agency is required to provide their personnel file for us, and the employee must sign a waiver so that we can look at that before hiring. So that's another component of that law.
Thank you. All right, the role of the Civilian Advisory Board?
Well, we don't have a Civilian Advisory Board by title. I would say the Merit Commission is as close.
Yes.
The two members of that commission are civilians. And so they help us review our hiring practices, our promotional practices. Any disciplinary action is appealed to them. And so they're a big component in the integral workings there.
Okay, thank you. Okay, union partnerships. What role does a union play in training?
You know, we really have a great relationship with our deputy sheriffs are represented by the Fraternal Order of Police. So we have a really, really good relationship with our deputies who are FOP members. The only role that they're involved in discipline would be representing an employee who is being disciplined. So at no point, I'll take that back. If the employee is being interviewed as part of a disciplinary internal affairs action, then they could have a member of the FOP there with them. Certainly their attorney would be there, their FOP attorney. So that would be the only other time that they would be involved in that process. The unions really, they don't have a role in training at all. And if we have a problem employee, it's not uncommon to have a discussion with the union leadership and say, you know, we need help in some behavior modification, whatever that might be, and get buy-in from the union, acknowledging that performance issue and how to correct it. So that's been pretty effective. You know, the Deputy Sheriff's Association, the FOP, I think they can speak for themselves as far as transparency and their role on justice and policy reforms.
Thank you. There is a difference between how the there is a difference between how the Sheriff's Department operates as well as the Police Department. Yeah, and this is one of the key issues. So, okay, and I think that Chief Bliemeister had addressed this quite a bit. But would you want to speak to how jurisdiction is determined? What are the mutual aid situations you work on, and how do you handle how do you decide who handles interference?
Yep. You know, we work together on a variety of issues. We are involved in a number of task force. The Lincoln Lancaster County Narcotics Task Force has been around for more than the 44 years that I've been with the Sheriff's Office. I think there's been a task force. So we have been a part of that task force forever. And each task force operates a little bit differently. The Lincoln Lancaster County Narcotics Task Force is commanded by a Lincoln police captain. And the deputy sheriff assigned there answers to him or her. So if there's a conflict in our policy versus LPD's policy, then that might get brought to our attention. But on a normal day-to-day basis, the deputy's going to follow the directions that an LPD captain would give him. Conversely, we have the Metro Area Fugitive Task Force based out of our office. We have a Lincoln police officer assigned to that task force, and that's a joint task force with the U.S. Marshals Service. So while the marshals are the overarching authority that provides that legal authority for the task force, we have a sergeant in that task force, and so I would imagine the Lincoln police officer that's involved there would normally follow the directions of one of our sergeants, unless there's a difference in either policy for each agency or interpretation of that policy, and then that would get sorted out. And likewise, our criminal interdiction unit, we have a sergeant assigned there, and Lincoln Police has an officer assigned there. They work together every day, and the same kind of situation would occur. So today, our crime scene investigators are over at 13th and Washington, assisting LPD's crime scene unit. They'll take their cues from the head of the crime scene members, and that could be either a sheriff's deputy or a Lincoln police officer, depending upon the circumstances. So in this case, our deputies will be following the directions of the Lincoln Police Department for that homicide investigation. So like for the riots, the building is ours. We did whatever we could to protect the integrity of the Justice and Law Enforcement Center, and really the entire campus of the County City Building, 605 building, and our building. And then, as Jeff mentioned, 10th Street is LPD's jurisdictional responsibility. There is no way that any one agency could have handled the issues those nights without assistance from the other. It worked out well. State Patrol brought in personnel from all across the state to assist in both the Capitol here in Lincoln and up in Omaha, and the National Guard's assistance was invaluable in keeping our building from receiving any more damage than it already had. So from a jurisdictional perspective, it gets broken down onto the Capitol is pretty much State Patrol's responsibility, along with the Governor's Mansion. The streets in between was the responsibility of the Police Department, and our building and campus was our responsibility. So it sort of gets broken down that way. If we're working a University of Nebraska football game, obviously that's the University of Nebraska's jurisdictional issue, and they're the ones that are giving directions there in a unified command setting on how things are going to happen in that setting. So, I think when we had the Hallam tornado umpteen years ago now, 15 years ago, we had other law enforcement agencies there under the unified command, and that was all under the umbrella of the emergency manager. So I think Doug Alberg at the time was giving directions to us, state troopers, other folks that were there, along with other disciplines that were there to handle that crisis. So you have to be fluid, and as long as it doesn't go against your internal policies and practices, then you just make sure people will follow the commander of that unified command situation.
Okay. Well, I think that we're going to the incident command teams, and I think that kind of is a very fluid sort of thing too, I guess. When two or more agencies are involved, how is leadership determined? What are the mutual aid situations you work on? We've talked about the natural disasters football games. And how do you decide who handles interference?
Well, I'm going to take interference as being a conflict. I explained that a little bit with our task forces, that that we have it written in our mutual aid or our memorandum of understanding for whatever task forces that we have or whatever endeavor that we work on together, is that our employees are governed by their respective agencies, policies, and procedures. If there's a conflict between agencies and those policies, then we'll work that out at a different level. But for the majority of time, depending upon who's in jurisdictional command of that scene, the officers, the deputies, will take their cue. They'll respond to the leadership of that agency, whomever it might be, whether it's Lincoln Police or the Sheriff's Office. So a lot of times location is if we need assistance in the county and city officers come out to help us out, and they do, it's obviously that's our turf. If we go into the city to assist LPD, that's their turf. And so we're going to assist them in whatever way they need to and respond to their leadership in that manner. So, okay.
All right, open conversation. What tools do you need? Body cams, training. Number 2, the obstacles and the impediments for the completion of your job. Number 3, what measures should be taken if we are 5 steps into the 8 suggested reforms? Okay, and how can we help? And I think that that's in terms of the public as well as elected officials.
Well, we've already talked about body cams. Commissioner Flowerday has spoken with us about that, and the board's been very supportive. We've been planning this for 3 or 4 years to get body cameras on our deputies. And then the devil's in the details. It's the technical support, the storage, the policy development, those kinds of things that are going to be some of the ongoing costs that we're going to experience. And I appreciate the board's willingness to go forward with that project. We initiated that 6 and 6 program that Chief Deputy Duncan put forth about 4 years ago, and that plan was to increase our sworn staff by 6 deputies in 6 years. We've fallen a little bit behind that, but the board's been very supportive of that plan, and for the listening public, 6 deputy sheriffs provides one 24-hour-a-day, 7-day position. So it's not like we got 6 more people out on the road at any given time. It provides that one FTE 24/7. I think the actual number is 5.7 employees it requires. So we'll just round that up to 6. But so that was Todd's vision. It's worked out very well. I think we have just this year hired number 3 of that 6 and 6. And we'll be coming back to the board for number 4 when that's appropriate, recognizing and acknowledging the physical restraint that we're all under this particular year. But more officers, it's something that was really evident when we got to the riots, because we started putting people on 12-hour shifts because we didn't know when or what we would need at any given time. So we put our employees on 12-hour shifts on Saturday and Sunday, and then Monday, it's business as usual around our complex. So we still have courts in session, we still have people that need to work. We ran out of people very quickly and exhausted them, not unnecessarily, but we really exhausted some of our employees. Many of them worked 14 days without a day off. A lot of them worked a ton of overtime. Our overtime figure for that weekend and for that entire week was about $60,000. $60,000. And a lot of that had to do with, maintaining normal operations during business hours, and then maintaining, some sort of crowd control contingent after hours. So you know, that was a huge issue. On a normal day-to-day basis, we can get by with the number of deputies that we have until something major occurs, and then you just run out of folks real fast. I'm always worried about minimum staffing levels. You know, people just don't realize the vast amount of differences in the county that we travel. Our smallest patrol area is about 240 square miles. So if you have to go from one end of that patrol district to another, it could take you 15 minutes easy. And if your workmate in the next district over is at one end of their district and you're at the other end of your district, the response time could easily be 20 or 25 minutes. So it's really important to me that we have sufficient people on duty to make sure of the safety of our employees. And that's, you know, I think one of the things that I've always kind of prided our agency on is the diplomacy that our deputies develop, because they are so far away from any available backup. They really learn to be diplomatic. They have to learn real quickly, if this is going to go bad, can I physically conquer this opponent, or do I need to back off and call for assistance? And those employees have to make those decisions very quickly. And sometimes an arrest may have to wait a day until you can get available resources back there to do it. But I think deputies are very good at recognizing the severity of the situation and being diplomatic about it, and really convincing people, if they're going to go to jail, it's in their best interest to cooperate with us. So I really do appreciate that. Civilian employees, we've talked about an analyst for the camera program, and that's going to be forthcoming. We rely heavily on Lincoln Police Department's civilian staff. They have a crime lab, fingerprinting folks, the forensics lab, which I forgot to mention, that we jointly participate in. We rely on Jared Maneri to look at some of our video and enhance that for us. So we work collaboratively on just a number of issues that really stretches our employees, whether they're city or county employees, a little bit further, and help us provide better service at a more economical cost. You know, we're looking at our policy. I thought I didn't hear the echo there. We're looking at our policies just like every other agency is in post Minneapolis. We have used the lateral vascular neck restraint for years. It's been an option on our force continuum, just like LPDs. And in some cases, when you have a smaller officer and a larger opponent, the LVNR is a very effective tool. We have never authorized chokeholds, and never have authorized holds that would restrict the airway of a person. So just to make that clear, but we're going to look at the LVNR and maybe move that to either remove it entirely or move it to a higher level on the force continuum to where it's a deadly force component. So, you know, we don't require our employees to get shot before they can shoot back. If somebody's displaying a firearm at them, you know, they're authorized to use deadly force. In the last 30 years, we've used deadly force 4 times. 2 of those events have been fatal, and 2 of them were non-fatal. So one of the events that was non-fatal involved a man in his pickup truck ramming one of our patrol cars with a deputy inside, and the deputies ended up shooting through the windshield. It was not fatal, but it stopped the threat. So I think we've been very judicious. All of those cases especially in the fatality cases, have been cleared by a grand jury. And all of those 4 cases have been cleared through our internal affairs process. So I think that we're very judicious, and we use, our use of force is very limited. We generally have, I think in the last 5 years, we've had 4 complaints of excessive force. So, you know, I think those have been investigated through our internal affairs process, and none of them resulted in a sustained finding. They were either unfounded or exonerated, which means the force was legal and justified. We have not banned shooting at moving vehicles, but it's strongly discouraged and only as a last resort. So I think that's just not a good practice. But what can you do, and what can the public do to help? And I've talked with Councilman Shob about this before, and other leaders in other minority communities. Support the members of your community who want to get into law enforcement. I have seen it time and time again where minority officers take more abuse from their own communities than those of us who are white. And it really, you would think that if we have a Hispanic or a black officer, that they might be a liaison to those communities. And it's exactly the opposite. It's really discouraging. So when I see that happen, I think, why would a young African American or young Hispanic man want to become a law enforcement officer when they're not going to be supported by their community, and in fact they're ostracized? So that's really a huge deal for me. I think that's really important, and just encourage people to become law enforcement officers. I thought with all the emails I got this post Memorial Day on people who were seeking change, I thought we'll have a glut of applicants for people that want to become law enforcement and make a change. Maybe I'm wrong. Support those laws that assist law enforcement. I know that Lancaster County has a lobbyist. I know the city of Lincoln does too, and we have worked collaboratively on mutually beneficial legislative bills. I think those are really important. I guess Jeff's statement, and I work hard to keep politics out of law enforcement. I consider you folks all politicians. I don't consider myself a politician. I'm a cop that got elected, and that's a little bit different than being a politician. And so, if we can keep politics out of law enforcement, that would really serve everybody better. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. Okay, I think that this is now the time for questions, and so I'll turn it back over to Jane.
Thank you, Roma. And we have a limited amount of time because I know the city council members need to scoot and get to our 3 o'clock meeting. But does anybody have any questions? Okay, I see James Michael. Go right ahead.
Thank you for coming out. This question, I got just 3 quick questions that I would like to ask, and these are going to be more directed towards Chief Bliemeister. I was wondering if you talk a little bit about the school resource officers and how you go about choosing which officers become school resource officers and what their education or experience might be.
You bet. Thank you, Councilman Bowers. The school currently we have 12 school resource officers, 6 that serve in the high schools and 6 that serve in the 12 middle schools. And it is a very competitive practice based upon their prior experiences. In fact, at least one, if not actually more than one, of our school resource officers have a background in education. Another one has background in psychology and counseling. And we bring in members of the school and members of the community in those processes in order to afford them input, trying to ensure that there's the best candidate possible. And I also really want to emphasize that in 2018, 2019, when we were reviewing should school resource officers be in the middle schools, we went through in-depth public hearings surrounding those circumstances. And we developed very strict protocols through the Safe and Successful Kids Interlocal Board that is evaluating the data that is present. And I'm really proud of that because eventually that was adopted by the Nebraska State Legislature and is the evaluating criteria going forward.
Thank you, Chief. You mentioned briefly about accreditation for Lincoln Police Department, and I was wondering if you could expand on that just a little bit.
Yeah, we're one of about 800 of 18,000 policing agencies in the country that are accredited by CALEA and have been since 1989. And I want to put out a huge thank you. If you would raise your Sergeant Vigil, Officer Luke Bonkowitz, Captain Jason Stilley, Aaron Spilker, who all of them are involved in the CALEA accreditation program. And so we're spending tremendous amounts of time, money, and resources, and it's for a purpose, because there are rigorous standards and best practices that we have to meet, not just this year because of the events that are in front of us, but every single year we have to ensure that our policies meet those standards and that we're actually doing it. We have to prove that we are doing the things that we codify. And there's been a lot of, when we start talking about budget cuts and time, where do you spend and prioritize dollars? And that's going to continue to be a process that we prioritize, because I think it does make us a successful agency that's meeting the expectations of all of you.
Thank you, Chief. And then just the last question that I have is, can you expand a little bit about the Victim Assistance Program? And can you speak about what they do in the community?
Yeah. Currently today we have 3 full-time victim service advocates. They are civilian employees, members of the Lincoln Police Department. They are grant funded for the most part, although there are matching dollars that come from the Lincoln Police Department General Fund. And those 3 individuals work collaboratively. Sheriff Wagner mentioned the Child Advocacy Center. They work collaboratively with them. The Friendship Home, Voices of Hope. Because we recognize that, like so many different things, while our officers are responding and we're investigating, that is not the totality that leads to a quality of life. And I think that just emphasizes the community policing approach so well, in that where our expertise stops, the expertise of others, inclusive of the Victims Assistant Unit, continues to serve them long after the investigative approaches have stopped. And that's one example, but there are so many more, whether it's the Bridge, the CAC, Mental Health Association of Nebraska, Centerpoint, the list goes on and on. So,
thank you. Thank you, Chief.
Okay, is there anyone else that might have a question for either Chief Bliemeister or Sheriff Wagner? Okay, I don't have my glasses on because they fog up. I don't see anybody raising their hands. No? No? Okay. Well, very grateful for your time and for coming before us today. This session has been very informative. There are a lot of things that we didn't know and are hard to find about the policies and procedures in each of your agencies. So I'm very grateful for your time, and thank you for the public that attended, and we are adjourned. Oh, is there a motion to adjourn? Okay, Roma moved to adjourn and seconded by Washington. Please call the roll.
Bowers.
Point of order. I think there's a question out here.
I have to explain that there is no public comment at the City County Commons, but if you have a question, we have index cards. Angie, could you raise your hand? We have index cards, and you may write your question on the card, and we will be happy to turn them in to either Chief Bliemeister or Sheriff Wagner. They will provide a written response that we will include with the minutes of this meeting, so you can see their answer to your question. So Angie has the index cards, and please, you are welcome to write your question down. And those questions will be in a written answer format because the City Council has to leave so that we can get to our next meeting in the City County building. Okay, let's take a vote on that.
Yes.
On the adjournment.
Are you ready for the roll?
I'm sorry?
You're ready for the roll call?
Angie, what did you say? I didn't hear you.
Are you ready for the roll call?
Yes, we are.
Bowers.
Yes.
Schob. Yocum.
Yes.
Washington.
Yes.
Ward. Shore. Christianson. Flowerday.
Yes.
Mcginnis.
Yes.
Amundson. Rayville.
Yes. Okay, we are adjourned. Thank you all again.